Well, I was here. I mean, I was here in the 60s, too.
Yeah.
I was here with my family in 67 and 68. In 1976, my twin brother and I came to New York on a loft jazz and basic jazz pilgrimage, staying with a family friend, and that was when I thought this was like the place for me, really. But life took another direction for me. A lot of water under the bridge before I finally made it here.
God, the late 70s, like what a wonderful time to be downtown doing, improvisational jazz music.
Yeah, we went to hear, music at the Tin Palace on the Bowery, loft jazz around the corner from there, upstairs Studio Infinity, which was where Stanley Crouch and David Murray were holding forth, but when Stanley was still interested in the avant-garde. We went to a place called Environ that was run by a pianist named John Fisher, and then went to a couple of events as part of Newport in New York. So we went to the Herbie Hancock retrospective and the tribute to John Coltrane with Elvin Jones Band and McCoy Tyner's band. I went to Boomers, heard some hard bop. Bradley's was, I think, happening then for sure, but I didn't go into Bradley's, and that was literally around the corner from where our family friend now lives. At that time, he was at Bleecker and Grove Street.
So 76, how old would you have been at the time?
19, I think.
19, okay. And you were already ready? You were all in on this jazz thing?
Yeah.
You were ready to just do that?
Well, I didn't think I could make it here, but I just liked it here, and I liked what was happening. In the 80s, I thought of seriously doing it, but I had gotten married, and it just wasn't possible to bring my wife to New York and have me struggle to try to make it here. And she had had a traumatic head injury 4 years into our marriage, and things took a slightly less adventurous turn in terms of me traveling a lot for a while, for example. I was playing with Julius Hemphill by then and with Charlie Hayden. I did go to Europe with Julius 3 times in the 80s, but mostly I was working retail jobs for about 18 years.
What point were you actually able to sort of like fully make the leap and do this full time?
1998, although I wouldn't say I was really making much of a living.
Yeah.
It really started when I joined Wilco.
That's crazy.
I was almost 50.
You've been doing music for much longer than that. It was just sort of a side thing for a few decades, I guess.
Well, I mean, it was my main thing in my mind, but I just couldn't make a living. There's no way. Especially, I didn't want a job with any responsibility, so I could go off and do these little tours. So, for example, in 1995, I toured rather extensively with Mike Watt. That's how I met the Geraldine Fibbers and ended up touring with them in 96 as a sub for their guitarist, Daniel.
Mike is how you ended up with your wife as well.
It is. Yeah,
there's a lot of gifts from Mike Watt.
Yeah,
he's a very generous man.
Punk rock cupid, because that's how I met Carla Bozulich, with whom I was, I guess, a partner we were together for 8 of the 12 years that we were sort of a couple. And that happened a little later after playing with the Geraldine Fibbers. But so I was able to tour and then still get my job back, but it wasn't something I could do full time. And in 1998, I stopped doing the day job, and I had this little tiny publishing deal. So I was getting $1,300 a month of fake BMG publishing money through a boutique publisher called M3. But then that ended after like 9 months.
You were writing songs for people?
I was supposed to be their instrumental composer in residence.
Supposed to be.
Yeah, nothing really ever happened, except I got fake money.
What is it?
I thought it was $1,300 a month.
mean?
I thought I was doing great.
Yeah.
It's an advance on something you might make.
I see.
And there was an advance. In fact, the lawyer that I saw about the deal, which was completely cut and dry, and I didn't need a lawyer, it turned out was incredibly high-powered entertainment lawyer here in New York City, recommended to me by Steve Shelley of Sonic Youth. So it's just one of those.
Why was it so difficult for so long to make a living? Obviously you were in around these bands Sonic Youth, other people who were able to survive on that.
I mean, I think the main reason was I was in Los Angeles, to be honest, even though it's my hometown and my dad's hometown. And
there's music industry out there.
Yeah, but I wasn't really a session player.
Okay.
I wasn't interested in that kind of work.
It seems like something you could have done if you had put your mind to it. I mean, you have the chops, right?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm versatile, but I don't know if I was so interested in being versatile at that time. I mean, I was versatile enough to play with Mike Watt and then play acoustic chamber jazz or whatever, but the session scene is a whole universe unto itself, a microcosm of different kinds of individuals. I was striving to play creative music, and then ended up playing with Mike Watt after sort of befriending Thurston Moore, and between Thurston and my friend David Crouch, who was managing Rhino Records, where I used to work for years, they kind of brought Watt and me together when Firehose was disintegrating. And I got there, all of a sudden I was back playing rock and roll, but I had sort of promised myself I wouldn't do it anymore. I'd been in a band in Los Angeles called Block for almost 8 years and signed and dropped and all that stuff, and unhappy with that. And so I thought I'd been screwing around too much. And especially when I went to my friend and actual musical mentor, John Carter's funeral, and there I was with my really long hair and girls headband and probably nail polish, and just thought, the hell am I doing? And then a few years later, I was playing rock and roll again with Mike Watt. It was really fun.
So that first time, it sounds like you were trying in earnest to break it as a popular musician in a way that, you hadn't before or after.
Well, then that was a weird thing, too, because I'd only been playing instrumental music primarily, except for junior high school, where my brother and I had a band that played some cover songs, but a lot of instrumental jams. That was my main interest and my brother's main interest, and we got interested in jazz and jazz rock and progressive rock in 1971, 72 when we went into high school. The band Block happened because my friend Stuart Liebig, who's still a friend of mine, great bass player, was starting a band that he wanted to have be, I guess, a combination of funk and I guess a kind of progressive rock thing. And I was wanting to play music for people who were standing up, not sitting down at that point. Yeah. And the same 5 people stayed in this band for almost 8 years, but it became quite the, I guess one might say most families are dysfunctional on some level. It was quite the dysfunctional family. But we stuck it out. I was trying to make a living playing music, so I thought, well, this is pretty cool. So I stayed with it and I was playing with Charlie Hayden on the West Coast and with Julius all at the same time, and then working full-time in a record store. I
mean, it sounds like musically a progressive funk band could be musically fulfilling in a way, right? I mean, at least...
It was fun at first.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the music so much as the personalities just grating on each other after a while. And I think being a result of being at cross purposes more than, anybody being, kind of a messed up individual or anything. It was just that I think we had different goals, and that was what kind of made it impossible after a while. And also people change, like in a relationship. I started getting tired of the fact that all the songs in Block at the beginning all were forbidden to have 2 and 4 backbeats. There were always these hocketed, super brainiac, crazy grooves. Stuff. Well, it was more like, that song 777 9311 by The Time. It was like that kind of a thing, even though that's a Lynn drum machine. Yeah. It was really like trying to play like that. So people would come up
to play like a robot.
Yeah, well, but still swing, but kind of complicated. And I wanted to do some like George Clinton style 4 on the floor funk, and it was forbidden. And then it took us for so long to write original songs because it was all democratically written and there was no leader in the band. And so I started suggesting that we at least to play as encores cover songs, and that was forbidden for a long time until, I guess, a vote was taken or something. So there was tension about that. And ironically, we became really well known for our cover song interpretations, and people loved it. But anyway, it was just a lot of doctrine, but with no leader.
Do you feel like you were carrying any of that, of your own doctrine at that point? I mean, we all have these things early in our life when we're first starting, that lines that we arbitrarily won't cross.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of those, to be honest, I guess, because
surely not at this point, but...
Well, I mean, I had a really broad palette of interest, or if that's the right expression, but line I wouldn't cross, I don't know. I mean, at that point, I wouldn't have been in a hair metal band, but I don't have an interest in, I mean, I was dancing around like a maniac on stage, which I still move around a lot, but not preening. Yeah. You know what I mean? I wasn't into this preening.
You were wearing nail polish, though, you said.
Well, that was, a little later. Actually, now, I guess I think about it, that was probably a later development. That was Pat Smear that first put nail polish on my fingers, I guess. So that was 94.
I see.
Yeah, it might have been 95, actually. So, no, I guess I didn't have long hair anymore. I got my... But I did have the girly headbands back then. I was trying to look like Veronica Lake. It wasn't successful.
I'm sure for any number of reasons that didn't quite work out.
Well, I had the hair,
yeah,
but I wasn't very short, and also I don't have that kind of face, but, I could only dream.
You felt like as that was sort of coming to its end, that you thought at that point that was the last time you were going to be doing that band thing?
Well, not a band thing, a rock thing or a pop. Yeah. I was going to go back into exclusively playing original compositions by somebody, by me, by whomever I respect and admire, instrumental music with a lot of improvisation, which is kind of what I thought I was going to do in high school for my whole life. And that was what my twin brother Alex and I were doing in high school, was our version of basically like John McLaughlin and Weather Report and King Crimson. That was kind of our sound was based around those bits of inspiration and influence.
Maybe a little less in fashion by the time the 80s and 90s rolled around.
Yeah, I guess. By that time, I don't think this was in fashion. Certainly didn't garner us any, big fans in high school.
Sure, the Weather Report and King Crimson certainly had their moments.
Oh yeah, well, they were successful in those days, and truly, now that you mention it, things really did change, and there was a downturn for a lot of those artists in the Reagan years, because in the 70s and to some extent the early 80s, but in the 70s there were a lot of instrumental hits, not just from so-called progressive rock bands, or even what became known as fusion bands like Weather Report or Herbie Hancock's various groups. You think about Grover Washington Jr. and Stanley Turrentine and Roy Ayers and George Benson before he started singing. People were buying these records.
Even like Chuck Mangione, right?
Another example. Yeah. No, it's a huge example. Yeah. He did have that woman whose name escapes me right now sing with him, and that was a huge, huge song. I can't remember her name now. But I used to listen to KBCA, the jazz radio station at this point, every day in Los Angeles. And there was so much of that music once I started working in the record store that was selling like crazy. And the record store only sold used and cut out and bootleg records for a long time, then became a little more legit. It was this store called Rhino Records before the record label. Yeah. And those were really, really popular records. They were not just underground popular, they were selling. And there was scads. There were scads of records of that ilk, instrumental hits, and then Vangelis and whatnot.
Wendy Carlos.
Yep, well, that was early. Yeah, so people had a lot of interest in instrumental music at that time, and I saw heroes of mine like Ralph Towner and John Abercrombie go from playing concert halls in the late 70s to playing jazz clubs in the 80s. Very suddenly, which was fine with me, except that the jazz clubs were way more expensive.
Being in Los Angeles and doing the instrumental thing, it seems like there's a path to be blazed in film.
Well, I did end up in the 90s even scoring a couple of really terrible movies, but that's another whole private club world. My friend Vinny Golia scored a couple of films that I played on, one of which I actually really find entertaining, and the soundtrack's really entertaining, that he came up with, is called Blood and Concrete, a love story. Billy Zane and Jennifer Beals. But the ones I scored, you're not going to find those anywhere, and they were not really worth watching.
So you felt it was a situation where you just really needed to know the right people? Doors to knock on?
I started playing with Mark Isham later, and Mark is quite the film score mogul at this point. He broke into scoring films doing Alan Rudolph's movies. And so movies like The Moderns, Trouble in Mind, these were big independent films at the time. And his style, which I think lends itself to soundtracks quite well, of a kind of techno fusion, but smooth, with his great trumpet playing and sequencers and all this. He's actually quite a pioneer of this combination aesthetic, led to him being asked to do a lot of really big Hollywood production movies, And he said the best way to do it, his advice to me, which is pretty much impossible to follow, was to find somebody who you have rapport with, who believes in your style, and create a bond that can move forward into this particular director's oeuvre. You just... And that's how he broke into it. Now I'm sure he's doing 2 films at once, probably all the time, nonstop.
Why did that seem impossible?
Well, I really don't get along with film people. Probably ultimately,
Why is that?
My few contacts with they don't know anything about music, and then they always wanted everything changed. Now with a computer, it's easy, but they wanted everything changed once you'd done it, and then you have to do some kind of either crazy editing or you have to redo everything because they've just cut the scene differently and don't understand why the music won't fit anymore, and this kind of imperiousness. And I don't know. I always thought I could do it technically and write some music, but having to do the PR part too much. I mean, I'm really a people person, to be honest, but I get impatient or even quite irritable with a certain attitude or ignorance, perhaps you could say. It's another thing where if I found the right person and he said, "Hey man, do whatever you want," and we'll do blah, 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 I say, okay, fine. That's great, because who doesn't love movies?
You do strike me as somebody who thrives in collaboration, but the difference is that it's sort of two architects building two parallel houses at the same time and then adjoining them later.
Right, something like that. Yeah, when I think of the experimental films of Charles and Ray Eames, and they obviously love jazz, they found somebody in California, probably Bud Shank. I don't know who played on these, if it was like Bud Shank or Buddy Collette. These really cool school jazz scores that they used in some of their experimental films. And and Lauren de Almeida played nylon string guitar on some of their experimental films, and it's really charming. And I know they must have been friendly with all these people. They didn't just say, like, get me a jazz score, for my 10-minute experimental film. And that would be super fun to be able to collaborate with geniuses like Charles and Ray Eames,
It really has to be somebody who the spirit of their project has to match yours. I mean, obviously you're somebody who enjoys improvisation, and there's perhaps the opportunity to do that, but maybe films don't quite exist in that same way now.
I think they kind of can. It just depends on who's the filmmaker is and who's the musician or composer. I did a score, I don't know what it sounded like, but I remember being asked by a composer named Jeff Rona to go to this place in Santa Monica, which turned out to be where Hans Zimmer had his song factory. But he had a little room there, and basically he was scoring a film, kind of one of these Coyote Ugly kind of, like 20-somethings in harm's way and doing stupid things or whatever. I don't know much about. I don't remember what it's called even, But he just had me play, and he sat on the floor with Rack Electrics was a company at the time with the IX at the end, Electrics. And he just sat and manipulated my sound for a couple of hours, and I got paid. And to be honest, after doing a couple of Mark Isham soundtracks, it was one of them that got me out of a lifetime of debt, because I had a huge credit card debt that I had incurred during the years that my then wife was struggling her way out of her head injury. And not to go into any detail, things got out of hand, and mostly without me being aware of it. And half of a long story short, I did one film with Mark where it was just me and Mark. And all I was doing was replacing samples and synthesizer sounds, which I also did mostly once for Danny Elfman for a movie he scored. And because I can make funny noises, and I love doing that more than trying to play like Larry Carlton on a soundtrack, which I don't think I could do.
Great studio guy, though, Larry Carlton.
No, all those guys, Dean Parks and certainly the Wrecking Crew guys are some of my heroes. Howard Roberts and Tommy Tedesco and Dennis Budimir and Glenn Campbell.
Larry Carlton coming in and laying down the guitar solo for Steely Dan.
Yep. Although I have to say I'm a Danny Diaz fan, and nobody talks about Danny Diaz's solos with Steely Dan, which I love. But anyway, all those guys are amazing. This movie didn't even play in the States. And I really am grateful to Mark for filing with the Musicians Union so that I made considerable money from the Secondary Markets Fund. And this movie, and I think it was called The Highwayman. It's a slasher film out in the desert, which, they have no budget if they're doing it out in the desert. It did well somewhere, and one check wiped out my entire debt. It was amazing. My whole life changed that one day. So I had to thank Mark, and Mark's a really great person anyway.
As these projects are coming about, you have no idea what's going to come of them, and sometimes you just get lucky.
Totally. Well, my whole life's like getting lucky, it feels like, I mean, whatever I described that sounds like struggles, I was doing what I wanted. It wasn't lucrative. But, I had a lot of financial stress. But I knew what I wanted to do since I was 12. And so that I consider to be actually lucky in itself, even though the obsession with sound or with music making had its painful elements. It's, look, I'm a white dude. You know what I'm saying? My parents were supportive of me and my brother doing artistic endeavors. They bailed us out of a couple gnarly situations that a lot of people never, ever experience, that kind of love and support. So I'm not complaining. I just wanted to keep going, and I did.
You probably had opportunity to, I don't know if sell out is the right word, that's the word that they used to use, but you had opportunity to pursue something more commercial, but you were more interested in doing what you wanted to do in that category.
Yeah, this band block was as commercial as I think I was going to get in the 80s anyway. And after that, no, I had no interest in, but I have nothing against popular music or music that people listen to for non-musical reasons because it speaks to their lifestyle or their troubles or their romantic dreams.
I mean, you're in Wilco.
That's poetry, man.
Yeah, I mean, Wilco's a fantastic band, but Wilco is a big popular rock band.
Right. Well, that was an accident, I mean, it wasn't an accident from Wilco's standpoint, I guess, but it certainly dropped into my lap out of the blue.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I had met Jeff when the Geraldine Fibbers were opening for Golden Smog for a couple of weeks in 1996. But we weren't hanging out or anything. But I sat in with them on the last day of the tour and played On the Beach by Neil Young. They had great taste in covers, Golden Smog. And Jeff remembered that, apparently. I found out later. I made an impression. But also Carl Bozulich of the Fibbers stayed in touch with Jeff, and they sort of became distant friends, and Mutual Admiration Society developed. And I ended up playing in Carla's band post-Fibbers, and we also had a duo called Scarnella for a number of years, and ended up opening for Wilco. And also, if I was in Chicago with Carla, playing with her or with my band, the Singers, if we needed something, he would lend us an amp or a baritone guitar. So I went to the Wilco loft and got an amp one day because we were just, I don't know what, we'd flown in for something. I don't remember why I didn't have an amp that day. But so he's very nice. And then we opened for Wilco, and I'd met some of the guys before, but I met them all that little micro tour that we did in the Midwest with Carla opening for Wilco, and that's when everybody heard me playing like lap steel. And so when Leroy Bach left after recording A Ghost Is Born, I know that Jeff knew he was going to get Pat Sansone. Pat was already John Stewart's musical partner in the Autumn Defense, and he's one of those guys that plays 5 instruments and sings beautifully and knows 3,000 songs. And I don't know why he thought I might be a good addition, but I think Glenn may have suggested me when he and Jeff were talking about something Jeff was looking for to add to the band. So I don't know. I should probably ask.
I feel like at this point you're at a point where you could ask, before you maybe don't want to jinx it. But
it's been 15 years. So and I had, to be honest, and I'm not saying this as any kind of what Mike Watt would call badge buff. It's not a point of pride, but I had turned down a couple of tours prior to joining Wilco that would have paid my bills.
You don't want to name any names?
No.
Okay.
But I just wasn't interested in the music, and I also had gigs that it's sad and funny to think about it now, really. But for example, I remember at one point I got asked to tour for a month, kind of at the last minute too, which irritated me, and was contacted.
You probably weren't somebody's first choice.
Maybe not. I don't know. But I did know a couple of people in the group, and it's a prominent singer-songwriter and somebody I respect, but also had been sort of warned off on a personality level. But anyway, it irritated me in the case of at least one of these alleged opportunities that the person, him or herself, didn't contact me.
You wouldn't even give me a gender?
I want to know. No. Well, there was a man and a woman. Both, kind of thorny but interesting artists and nice people when they're nice, I ended up being really in very, very good shape with one of these people and ended up recording and became friendly, and that was a whole other story. But that was later. Anyway, I had a gig with Philip Greenleaf, the woodwind player improviser in the Bay Area with whom I'd played on and off. And we had a gig at Yoshi's coming up of doing his strange improv band with G.E. Stinson and me. And I'm trying to remember who the fourth person was. But anyway, I couldn't turn him down. I'd already said I'd do the gig. So I paid like $100 and I had to drive to the Bay Area and play. There was no way I was going to bail on Philip. So that's the way my mind was working at the time.
Why was Wilco a good fit in a way others weren't?
Well, for one thing, it's been out in the world that I was going to get another day job after almost turning 50, and it's true.
Yeah, at that point in your career, you were kind of considering giving up the ghost a little bit?
No, I was going to just get a job and keep playing, but so I could have steady income and not be freaking out about my $600 rent that I couldn't pay and stuff like that.
So there was never a point, when you were struggling, when you thought you were going to give up music?
There was. Actually, but it had nothing to do with money. It had to do with aesthetics. It had to do with my Western dichotomous mindset getting the better of me and my neuroses. Yeah, this was in the 80s, and I felt I had to decide between rock and jazz and between acoustic and electric music. And on the guitar, I mean, not exclusively, it was actually driving me crazy.
You thought you couldn't do both at the same time, or?
Well, I had been, but I wasn't. I felt like for some reason I had to focus, and I think there was a fair amount of pressure especially in the late '70s, early '80s. Not so much from the musicians as from the writers writing about music to have some kind of purity, and they were kind of protecting the kind of music I liked from pop influences, and I was interested in the language of blues rock and progressive rock and effects, pedals, and whatnot.
Because I'm thinking of all this coming on the tail end of like Miles Davis, right? Like getting influenced by Jimi Hendrix and making his trumpet sound like a guitar.
Right. But the critics hated that band and hated that music. And then Miles disappeared for a while in the 80s. And
did that Cyndi Lauper album.
Yeah, that came out when he returned. Yes, right. Man with the Horn. And I don't know why it was driving me crazy. I was absolutely infatuated with Sonic Youth, and I wish that I could have unlearned everything that I had finally learned, because I was a very late starter in terms of learning music theory, and certainly I never had a guitar teacher show me anything of worth except finally once a diatonic scale in chords, the C major, D minor, E minor. I was like, oh my God, that was the most important thing I learned from a guitar teacher. I had two guitar teachers for a very short amount of time. Both of them moved out of town. One of them actually kind of tormented me and ruined my life in a certain way because of his old school harsh methods, and I was a sensitive lad, and I just wanted to learn, But back to the '80s and my thinking I should give up music. I was infatuated with Sonic Youth. I was infatuated with a lot of punk rock, and at the same time playing nylon string guitar with Charlie Hayden, acoustic chamber music with quartet music. My friends Eric Von Essen and Jeff Gauthier and my brother Alex, and we played together this configuration for I think about 11 years.
I guess I though understand the desire to focus on one thing, right? To get really good at that one thing and to move in that direction.
I mean, I think it was envy of people who have a very narrow direction.
People who figured it out in a way.
Yeah, and I can't think of too many guitarists that come to mind that are maybe huge favorites now. I mean, there are people that I love in the jazz guitar world, but I didn't think I could be like them, But maybe I thought I should learn bebop. I should play like Joe Pass or something. I don't know. Pat Martino, I love. Was really interested in all these players. Pat Metheny was really huge for me. And he was in the cracks, kind of, but he could still really blaze on standards. And so I was just thinking about that and at the same time wanting to do music that was basically about sound and more dramatic and even slightly out of tune. So I thought maybe I'll take up upright bass, because I love bass. And particularly, I love acoustic bass. And I love acoustic bass solo, acoustic bass records. I mean, I love acoustic bass and bassists.
Your solution was to abandon the guitar?
Yeah. And then I thought, well, gee, I don't want to drag that thing around. And it's really expensive, a good bass. outrageous. So,
not that it's not a relatively versatile instrument, but talk about kind of painting yourself into a corner, leaving the guitar and picking up upright bass.
Well, no, but bassists when they're good, they work, man.
Yeah.
You can't keep a good bassist for long because everybody wants to play with this amazing bass player. So maybe I could be an amazing bass player, like besides Charlie Hayden, who was kind of one of my idols at the time, but like Bar Phillips or I don't know who I was listening to so much then. Dave Holland and a lot of the avant-garde guys like Peter Kowald maybe, or I don't know. Anyway,
were you a Mingus guy?
Oh yeah, and but I would never have thought I could play like that. That's coming out of sort of like that Wilbur Ware, that's a whole gut string thing. Like Charlie was a gut string guy,
but that would have felt like
Gary
obviously
Peacock was big for me.
But obviously, you've got a lot of the fundamentals as a guitar player, so in that sense, maybe not a huge leap over to bass, but like in a way, it would have felt like just completely starting your career over.
Yeah, which is kind of what I think I wanted.
Yeah,
and I didn't really have what career anyway. But
Fair enough.
The other thing, I played on some records and made some records, but
how far did you get into the bass thing?
No, I didn't do it. I thought I can't afford a bass, and it's big, and I have to carry it around everywhere.
Yeah.
So I thought, what would I do if I didn't play music? And it sounds humorous now, but I thought, well, I could either be a writer, or a visual artist.
Okay.
Which means I'd be broke, involved with solitary endeavors.
Were those things that you were doing at all up till then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my twin brother Alex is going for a degree in visual art. I was a philosophy major at first. That's a whole other story. I love writing and I love writers, but I love collaborating, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I love most about music besides sound is collaboration. Not necessarily just collaboration aesthetically or compositionally or improvisationally, but just having to find people to make music with, to make the music happen. And then having that happen. And you're all together making this music together and on your respective instruments. And it's an amazing experience for me. I love it. I can't get enough of it. When there's that commitment and articulation and mind meld and direction and propulsion, it's the best.
Do most of the projects that you do that are under your own name or, one of your project, do they start as improvisation? Do they start as jamming with someone else?
No.
No.
I usually just write by myself.
So there is a solitary element at the beginning.
Yeah. I have done collaborative writing with Carla Bozulich when we did Scarnella, and we did this record for Smells Like Records, and we went through and tried ideas and then wrote songs in the studio and recorded them, and there are improvisations on the record, and it's one of my favorite things I've ever done. But my solution, by the way, to my dilemma was to start my own band, which I'd never done. I'd always been in these democratic ensembles. Quartet music was a beautiful one because there was kind of a leader who is my friend Eric Von Essen, who was really my greatest musical teacher. He was a multi-instrumentalist composer, and he was primarily the bassist in this group. But he played piano and guitar and tabla, and was at one point picked up chromatic harmonica and became amazing in a year. And I always was privately happy that he never quite sounded good on cello, because cello was his last instrument he tried to play. But he died in 1997, and he had been through a lot of life changes, and we weren't really playing together anymore anyway. But I was out with the Geraldine Fibbers, and he was teaching jazz in Sweden and just died in his sleep. But starting my own trio, which was my first group, very original name, the Nels Cline Trio. Mm-hmm. I wanted to call it Bartholomew, but the two guys in the band basically told me I was insane, and that was a terrible name.
Were they right in hindsight?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was 1989. And
so it would have been the year The Simpsons premiered, and it would have been a band called Bartholomew.
Oh, geez. Well, Matt Groening was a customer at the record store. He used to come in every Friday when The Simpsons hit, because he all of a sudden had money.
Oh, yeah.
And he went from buying 2 records on every Friday to like 25, 30, 40 records. Yeah,
he's always been a supporter of the arts. I will say that about him.
He's a wonderful dude.
Yeah.
Really, really. We're never like tight friends or anything, but I have so much respect for him, and he's such a delightful person.
So that bands and these bands that you've started under your own name aren't democratic in the same way.
No, in fact, I was smart enough or firm enough to start for example, that first trio by saying, we're going to only play my music because I need to do this.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did.
Is collaboration fulfilling in the same way when you're really taking the reins like that?
Well, because I write for improvisers, you know, so everything I do, especially as I moved forward, there was always a piece of music or pieces of music that were improvised primarily. That way everyone has a voice, you know, and it's about our chemistry. But if somebody wants to step out and assert him or herself, the music allows for that. And then I have other compositions I call my fascistic compositions, where I want very distinct things to happen. And truth be told, I'd say more than half of those just were never fun to play live anyway, but they were great to record if we got it right, if I got the vibe going, you know, because they're dramatic sometimes and have a lot of little production touches, overlaid guitars, and they're very scripted, and they're really for me.
Was Wilco creatively fulfilling in the same way when you first started, when you were kind of, I don't know, brought on almost as like a ringer from the outside to play this existing body of music?
Yeah, well, I wasn't brought on as a ringer. I joined the band.
Sure.
For like over a year, they said I was a temporary member. Not they didn't, but I mean, the press did.
Yeah.
But I had joined the band. And
but I guess I just mean from the standpoint of like being somebody joining an existing band with an existing group of music.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call that a ringer at all. That's that's a huge commitment for a ringer. It was extremely collaborative at first, especially because Jeff was in rough shape, which I wasn't aware of at all. So he went into rehab. Tour was canceled, or postponed, I should say. And then
so you were joining this thing, and you're like, and all of a sudden, tour gets canceled, and the wheels start coming off.
I wasn't worried at all. I mean, I had a great time playing with Jeff and Glenn and talking with Jeff. Amazing phone conversations before I ever got to Chicago. I knew he was going to pull through and that he was being very brave, wanting to get out from under his problem and get his life together. And I was impressed. And he's been totally together ever since. Yeah. You know, now it's been 15 years.
But it felt collaborative from the start.
Especially Sky Blue Sky, because that was a very group-written album, because Jeff was in this kind of raw state and didn't feel as prolific as he normally is. And I can tell you, as I'd been told how prolific he was, and I was seeing Jeff at that time and going, wow, you know, well, he's really relying a lot of our ideas, and that's fun. And that was a really fun record to make. And now, the last few years, he's outrageously prolific, and he writes all the songs on the records because he already has so many. But we're going to probably, looks like we're going to do another record, maybe more in the Sky Blue Sky, from the ground up all together in the same room all the time, which is harder nowadays because everybody's older. Yeah. And only two people live in Chicago now. So I never moved to Chicago, but Pat moved to Chicago, and Michael was already there. Glenn's from there, and he's still there, and Jeff's not from there, and he's probably never going to leave. I don't know. I can't imagine. I think he really loves Chicago. And then, and there's me, and I went from Los Angeles to Brooklyn.
You flew right over.
John was in Chicago then, too. And so it's harder, but I think we'd like to do it just because it's been this kind of unpredictable, never know exactly what our role is kind of thing. It's still really satisfying, though, because the end result is something I enjoy listening to, you know, especially this new record. I think it's really amazing. And a lot of it is just ideas that Jeff has that we execute, you know. And he has so many songs, and he helped us a lot by having a few that were not quite finished and a million that were almost completely done that we basically didn't attack for the most part, you know. So instead, he said, here's some rough ideas. What do you think of this? And we're just jumped right in, you know. And then the stuff that was almost finished, sometimes those end up being Wilco songs, and we just play on them. You know, there's no pattern. But I don't even know how many songs he has. He's after the Warm and Warmer records, this new Wilco album, I'll bet he has 40 or 50 songs still that he doesn't know what to do with, that are recorded on something on his phone or whatever. I mean, we've played along with guitar tracks that he recorded on his iPhone on the bus on some tracks, you know, because it's got a vibe, you know, and it's not even tuned to a tuner or something, so we all have to detune a little bit, and then it sounds really cool to us.
It's a good problem to have more songs than you know what to do with. It's better than the alternative.
He's phenomenal. I mean, he's just one of those one of those people who can really write songs. That's just my opinion, but I think it kind of seems obvious.
I think that's probably most people's opinion. I think most people have probably come around to that way of thinking. Most of the people I talk to in bands say that one of the secrets to longevity is that it is sort of run like a dictatorship, that there needs to be one sort of clear person with the idea moving things forward.
That works for me.
Yeah.
I have to say, it's if it's somebody you respect and they're respectful, then yeah. I mean, the thing about Wilco with the same 6 guys now for 15 years is that I don't think if it was disrespectful or we all hated each other and all that, like a lot of groups you hear about that have longevity and they don't ride on the same buses and they're, you know what I mean? I couldn't do it. And I have a feeling that most of us would just say enough is enough. The fact is that we really get along and love playing together. And it's so easy.
How does that break down when you're married to your bandmate?
Well, we're a duo.
Is the dynamic that much different when it's just the two of you versus a full band?
Well, I mean, the thing about Cup is, I guess, it's super intimate, but at the same time, we're pretty experimental as far as it's kind of like anything goes, really. We would love to forge a direction for Cup. Ultimately, maybe on a couple of the pieces on this record that's about to come out, we may have created a truly shared sensibility. You
feel like you haven't quite figured that out?
Well, I think that a lot of these songs existed. Were written when we first got together, and now we've been together 10 years. And so some of them are like, oh, that's a me song, and that's a her song, and blah, blah, blah. So I think we're forging ahead to a combined aesthetic, and that's something you can do as a duo. You know, I don't think it's that hard. I think it's harder with 4 or 5 people or 6 people than it is with 2. The other thing is we're not expecting to go on tour with it as much as Wilco tours. We can't because I'm in Wilco.
Yeah.
But also I just don't see that as the trajectory of Cup. You know, I think what we'd like to do is tour when we can, sell a few records for our label who've been nice to us, and further our music live. But the other thing about Cup is that it's really technological. And so Yuka's got quite a 3-ring circus going. And so sound checks are much more arduous, nitpicky, whatever. And we can't afford our own front of house person. So it's not dialed in with somebody we trust. It's just always this crapshoot. And you walk into a place and then we have to set up so much gear, we don't want to move it. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we'd like to play places that aren't rock pads where we're one of 3 or 4 bands playing.
I think you said this in an interview. You know, I think you might have used the word abrasive to describe some of your sensibilities.
Well, yeah. I mean, it is, once again, wide-ranging.
Yeah.
I think some of the pieces that have like Ableton drum sounds, and they're pretty like banging. They should be pretty heavy, loud, you know, bass heavy, all that stuff. And then other pieces are super delicate. Yeah. And somebody has to be able to figure out how to make that happen for the audience. And the people we know and love and trust are really busy, and we're not making any money, so we can't drag them out. So that is something we'd like to maximize, including visuals, light design. It would be really nice because we're just standing there, not particularly interesting to look at, and have something really visually compelling and cool.
Because you had described your onstage presence with Wilco and earlier as being a lot more energetic. Why are you kind of stationary during this?
Because there's a lot of knob twisting, and I'm singing a little bit, and Yuka's singing. She's got a headset. I'm not going headset. You know,
she's doing the Britney Spears, Garth Brooks thing.
Yeah. Never. Oh, it's Garth Brooks. Yeah, I was going to say never go for full Phil Collins, but
well, he had the drums. He had to do that.
when he bothered to play them. But yeah, fantastic drummer too. Wow.
Also a prog guy, right? Genesis.
Oh, I saw him with Genesis. Yeah, with Peter Gabriel. He's a fantastic drummer. Really, really fantastic. He's an incredible songwriter and musician. It's not always my kind of stuff, but I have immense respect for him.
He writes a great pop song for sure.
He does. It's kind of weird, and he sings a lot like Peter Gabriel, which is also eerie.
Was singing was that tough for you? Was it tough to get in front of the microphone like that?
It's hard. Yeah. I mean, I used to do wordless singing in my acoustic projects when I was in my late 20s or mid 20s.
Just singing a melody, or
yeah, I could sing pretty high, and it was kind of inspired by Brazilian singers like Baden Powell, or not the high part, but just the idea of using the voice as an instrument came from a lot of Brazilian music I love. And then in the rock band I mentioned, Block, which was sort of a funk rock something band, I ended up after a while really writing more than 50% of the lyrics for the band, though I wasn't singing. And we had a woman named Camille who sang, who had a real powerful voice, but didn't want to write words. She wrote words to one song and said, "That's it. That's my life story."
She ran out.
And I'm a word snob, so son of two English teachers. So and somebody who used to write poetry every day, and I'm a real fan of the written word. Then singing became a whole other way of worrying about words, because I reached a point with this band where I was writing lyrics where I basically felt, and also because there were a lot of limitations being put on me that I won't go into by the singer, but I have nothing left to say to the youth of America. That was what I said. And so you have to wonder sometimes, well, what are you saying if you're bothering to sing? In the case of Cup, it's mostly just little poems, and sometimes the words have a certain double meaning that only Yuka and I are privy to, and that makes it fun. So it's kind of like in code. And then I don't have to worry about it, the message, But back in the 80s and certainly in the 70s, I was thinking about the message, what are we saying? And I was worried about it, or wondering about what everybody was saying. And coming out of 60s counterculture and all that as a young person, I was really immersed in the message, and all that kind of stuff. Now I just don't really care so much. Now I just worry about singing in tune.
It could have just as easily have been instrumental music. Why was it important that the two of you vocalize?
It wasn't. It just seemed like a fun idea.
Yeah.
It was not, we didn't think about it that much. It was really, I guess you'd say, a natural progression or intuitive, or was it completely cavalier? I don't know. And it's not the focal point of the music. It's just sort of happens when it happens, and then there's plenty of instrumental stuff.
At this point, as you're circling around this, specific aesthetic for the band, does it feel that the work is a lot more 50-50 than it was before?
I think it's pretty 50-50. It's just, and always has been. Just the songwriting part, that wasn't. But the arrangements and just the sound in general, it's I don't tell Yuka what to do very often. Like, that sound, that keyboard sound, I'm not into that. I trust her to come up with cool sounds, and she works for hours and hours tirelessly mixing things or pre-mixing them for our record and doing all her production that she's been doing ever since the Cibo Matto days, when it was mostly samples, or all samples at the beginning. DJ 70, Roland sampling keyboard. All those songs were just that, the original versions. And I think she still evinces this amazing musical sensibility, and as well as being a composer herself. So I just I trust her to do something cool, and that's what happens. But if, for example, the title track on our record, Spinning Creature, was kind of a last-minute addition to the record because I got this idea. And perhaps interestingly, when we decided we had time to record it and we were going to add it to the record, and I'd been on tour a lot with my quartet and with some other people. This was when Wilco was on a break. She said, okay, let's just sit down and see, what are these chords again? And basically she simplified the song by saying, really, what if? And then the song became a lot more direct and no less flavorful, because she loves cool chords and chord progressions. But I tend to be, I guess, a little bit elaborate, or I embroider things too much at times. And so I was happy for that input.
Obviously, the way your relationship came out of you collaborating, and that you essentially met when you were in part of a band. But do you find that it's important to draw the distinction between just work and the time when you're just sort of like alone being a couple? Do you bring her work home with you?
Well, Yuka would love to be able to have this situation like we had when we were living in the West Village, where she had access to a studio 24/7 and then could just walk upstairs and go to sleep. We don't have that now. So she has a little cubicle in Gowanus, and then we have a place where we live where after 10 o'clock you better not make too much noise. And
quiet residential Brooklyn Street.
Yeah, it's a lovely living situation, but there are some rules. So I think she'd love to take her work home with her all the time and just be able to seamlessly move from the kitchen to the studio to the bed to the couch to the trash dump to the, you know what I mean, whatever. I like to sort of, I don't really care about any of that. I don't ever plug in at home. When I write a piece of music, I could do it anywhere. I just need a guitar to make sure what the notes are. And I don't even need peace and quiet necessarily. It's helpful, certainly. But generally, when I'm home, and right now I'm on tour so much, and we have this gig coming up, it's almost feels like a bummer to me to have to say, we need to work. Let's do it. Let's do it. We got this gig coming up because I'm leaving again on Sunday and I won't see her for over a month. So the tour is not over a month, but she has to go to Japan, and I'm going to join her there and see family. And so it's going to be a while. And so I treasure all this time basically sitting on the couch, trying to see if we're going to be lucky enough to see season 3 startup of Norseman or something. I don't know. So we're not workaholics.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people think I am because I'm productive, but I tell you, man, I'm not. I am not. I get a lot of sleep. I just happen to put out a lot of music, and half of that seems accidental. Like this record that just came out by the Radical Empathy Trio on ESP Disc called Reality and Other Imaginary Things with Tom McDonough and Michael Wimberly and me. It's just a live thing we did at Pioneer Works, and it was a good recording. And Tom said, "What do you think?" And ESP Disc said, "Yep." And so we have a record, just like the one with me and Larry Oakes and Gerald Cleaver on Clean Feed. They're live recording. They were interested. There's another record. So I'm on a lot of records, or like Joan Osborne records, where I come in and play on a few songs, or just sometimes I'm the guy that comes in. I don't know why this happens so often. A singer-songwriter friend is making a record, or a friend of a friend, and I go and I end up being the last guy to record on this record right before they're mastering. Or in the case of when I played on a couple of tracks on this Low album called Come On, which is an incredible honor to me because I'm such a Low fanatic. He and the producer, Alan Sparhawk, and the producer, whose name is Matt, and I can't think of his last name. He was the son of one of the guys in America. They were already mixing in an apartment in Studio City, California. And I just came into the apartment, and they just backtracked and put up some faders, and off I went. And then we had some Mexican food, and I went home.
In a very roundabout sort of way, you did kind of become that studio guy.
It's true. It's weird. But I feel almost maybe more at peace with my versatility now, and I think that has a lot to do with Wilco, because I tend to be not the avant-garde guy when Wilco's recording, for example, and certainly on the early Wilco songs where basically Jeff never told me what to play. There's a guitar solo here, so I play a guitar solo. Yeah. I don't immediately go Arto Lindsay, playing that solo. I'm hearing a kind of classic wailing something, not a weedle necessarily, although maybe I do that, but just a rock solo.
You have an idea of what Wilco is and should be when you're coming into that context.
So I'm tapping into this kind of this 14-year-old me sensibility-wise. Certainly, technically, I couldn't do that when I was 14. Because I used to play with 2 fingers, and I hardly knew any chords. I mean, I didn't even know how to tune the guitar when I first started playing. I find it extremely satisfying to do what the song seems to want, And in recording over the years, Jeff pulls all kinds of wild stuff out of me, but it's never my first impulse. My first impulse, I think, is sometimes almost annoyingly reverent to the song in a kind of conservative way. And sometimes that's just because I'm assessing the harmonic content, learning the song and the mood of the song, and the mood then tells me that it's sort of related to another kind of song, similar song. And then I think, oh yeah, like a kind of a high and lonesome lap steel thing in the background with a lot of reverb. I've done that already. Jeff doesn't want to have the same thing all the time. Like, well, that worked before, but we don't have to do that today. That's kind of the way he is.
That was Nels Cline. Cup's debut record, Spinning Creature, is out now. Thanks so much to Nils. Thanks to you, as always, for listening to the program. I hope you're doing well with all that's going on out there. We've got a bunch of these shows lined up, so we will be bringing you the program weekly as per usual until this whole thing dies down. I'm not going to plug my stuff because there's bigger stuff going on in the world right now, but stick around because we're going to be back just about this time next week with another episode of RIYL.